Star Trek the Motion Picture is much, much more than just the first Star Trek movie. It's the beginning of a new era. Back when Star Trek was on TV in the 60s, it wasn't all that popular. Sure, it had a cult following of fiercely loyal fans, but the ratings sucked balls. The animated series that ran in 1973 and 1974 was also unsuccessful. Adults thought it was for kids because it was animated, but it wasn't very popular with kids because it wasn't like a Saturday morning cartoon. But since then, Star Trek had gained in popularity by leaps and bounds through syndication, and after seeing 3 seasons of the original series and 2 of the animated series, many fans were left with wanting more. Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek, wanted to continue the story through movies, but after failing to come up with a script that Paramount was happy with, scrapped the project in favor of a new show, Star Trek Phase 2. Phase 2 never got made, but all of a sudden Paramount was very keen to do a movie. After the successes of such films as Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Star Wars proved that science fiction movies could be big successes. Star Trek the Motion Picture was a huge event. People were going bonkers over it because it was the first new Star Trek in 5 years, 10 years if you don't count the animated series. This came out a year before I was born, so I couldn't tell you firsthand about the hype and the excitement, but from what I can tell, it was considerable. People were expecting a sci-fi epic on par with Star Wars, and I dare say that a lot of Trekkers thought it would be better. What happened in reality could best be described as a mixed bag, however. While the movie made an assload of cash and was a financial success, the fact is that Paramount was expecting Star Wars-style box office returns. So even though they made loads of money, it was seen as a disappointment commercially. Critical response was lukewarm also, with most of the complaints being levied at the film's pace. It was too slow, not enough action, and far too long, with too big of a reliance on special effects. Well, that's all well and good for the film critics of 1979, but you're watching this to hear my review, right? Well, here's the thing. While I disagree with the general assessment that the movie is a dud, actually I disagree quite a lot, I can't really argue the points. Everything they say is valid. It is a slow movie, there is a heavy reliance on special effects, and it's definitely not an action movie. The thing is, I don't think that those are necessarily bad things, so let's talk about the movie. When the film starts, the first thing you get, even before the Paramount logo, is a nice little piece of music set to a Starfield backdrop. I don't know what the point is. It's almost as if they just put it there just so you can enjoy the music. Music's actually a big part of the film, so I guess that makes sense. Many of those long shots seem to be created to showcase the film's score, which is really very good. One of my favorites in a science fiction film, I would say. The movie's main theme would later become the basis of the theme song from Star Trek The Next Generation, so it definitely stuck around for a long time. So here's what happens. A huge, ominous-looking space cloud is making its way through space, and as it passes through the star systems of the Klingon Empire, they see it as a threat and dispatch some ships to destroy it. Right away you look at the Klingons and you realize things are different. They look completely different than they used to in the show. They have ridges on their foreheads, giving them a much more alien look. Though the look would be refined in future films and shows, it was a big leap from the bronze-skinned guys from the old show. Turns out that Roddenberry always wanted the Klingons to look more alien, and he finally had the budget to do it. Weird, eh? It did create a continuity issue that wasn't fixed until the show Enterprise, so, well, there's something to chew on. Anyway, the cloud completely obliterates the Klingons and just keeps moving. It's on a course set straight for Earth and seems to just completely destroy anything in its way. The only ship that could possibly intercept it in time is the Enterprise, which is being refurbished at the moment. Admiral Kirk takes over the ship, which angers the new captain Willard Decker, who gets temporarily demoted to commander and given the job of executive officer. He also winds up having to double as science officer once their new Vulcan gets killed in a transporter accident. Almost all of the main cast are back, except for Spock, who is on Vulcan undergoing a ritual to rid himself of all emotion. There are numerous problems with the ship due to not having enough time to finish the refit. Right after taking the ship out and attempting to go to Warp 7, they get stuck in a wormhole. This is one of the coolest scenes. Everything goes psychedelic, people's voices slow down, it's really trippy. Trippy is actually a good way to describe the entire movie. Now, I don't do acid, but if I did, I'd probably want to watch this movie. Soon after this, Spock joins them, which is a relief, though he's colder and more distant than ever. Anyway, the cloud turns out to house a gigantic mechanical life form known as the V'ger. V'ger is intent on returning to Earth to join with its creator, fulfilling its mission. Throughout a lot of exploration, communication, and an absolutely great scene where Kirk, Spock, and Decker journey into the creature's brain and discover the true nature of the V'ger, which is an old Voyager probe launched hundreds of years ago that was sent through time and space and evolved into this huge living machine. It gives visions of a planet run by machines, and everything it destroys is assimilated into it. Sound kind of familiar? Yeah. And Spock at one point says that resistance would be futile. Yeah, a lot of the Star Trek novels and games have drawn connections between V'ger and the Borg. And one comic recently said that Captain Nero, the Romulan bad guy from the new movie, came into contact with V'ger. Kind of crazy, huh? Decker winds up joining with the V'ger, completing its mission, helping it evolve by giving it human emotions. So, that's all well and good, but how do I feel about the film and the criticisms levied against it? Well, it is true that there are a lot of long, slow shots of nothing more than ships floating through space, and the special effects really do take over for the movie for the most part. I'd call that a bad thing if the movie was dumb, but it's not. Honestly, I think people were looking for an action-adventure film and got a cerebral, clever tale that was either over their heads or just not to their taste. If you like 2001, you would probably appreciate this movie more. Unfortunately, it really is one of a kind. Roddenberry was forced out of creative control of the films, and his proposed plan for Star Trek II was scrapped in favor of a cheaper, more adventure-driven tale. Now that turned out okay, actually more than okay, but I can't help but wish people would appreciate this film more. There are no space battles, and there's an awful lot of talking, but the point of the film is about an encounter with a new life form, and trying to understand it and get it to understand us. And after all, that's the whole point of Star Trek, right? To seek out new life and new civilizations. A lot of people say that the Star Trek series of movies starts with 2. I think that's unfair. While it's true that you don't have to watch this film to enjoy Star Trek II, the fact is that Star Trek II is a sequel to an episode, so it's not even a standalone tale. Now, I'm not bashing that movie. Not by a long shot, it's one of the best. But I think that because it was so good, and because this one is so offbeat and quirky, that people are unfair to the motion picture. It's not without its flaws, as it is a bit on the long side, and I think too much of the focus was on Kirk and the new characters Decker and Ilia. Sulu and Chekhov are barely there, and Bones doesn't do much more than yell at Kirk. Most of the medical stuff comes from Christine Chapel, who is now a doctor. There are some great lines, but it seems that Kirk got all the good lines, and a lot of the other characters get swept to the side. Overall, Star Trek the Motion Picture is a feast for the eyes and ears. The effects and score are beautiful, and the overall concept of the film is quite clever. It just drags a bit in the second act, as the film starts transitioning. I think most of the editing that could have been done was right there in the middle. Now, I want to be fair, and I will be. Star Trek the Motion Picture gets a 7 out of a possible 10.